This lesson is for 10.4, starts on page 529. We are going to talk about these different quadrilaterals, and the first thing that I want to tell you is that a quadrilateral has two roots in it that you should know, or a prefix and a root. Quad means four, and lateral means side. Okay? So these quadrilaterals are four-sided figures. The first one that we have is a trapezoid. And a trapezoid is a quadrilateral with only one pair of parallel lines. Okay? A parallelogram is the second one. We're getting more specific with each one. Parallelogram has two pairs of parallel sides. The next more specific one is a rectangle. A rectangle, you might be thinking, oh, that's so easy. We did this in preschool. Yes, but there are rules to rectangles. A rectangle is a parallelogram because it has two pairs of parallel sides. Another rule about rectangles is it has to have four right angles. And then different from a rectangle, we have a rhombus, which is a parallelogram, but more specifically as a parallelogram, it has four congruent sides. Okay? And another type of rhombus is a square, because a square is a parallelogram because it has two pairs of parallel sides. It has four congruent sides, and it is also a rectangle because it has four right angles. That's confusing, isn't it? Okay. So, in this lesson, you will be asked to classify quadrilaterals. If you see a square, but this is all you see in the book, this is what they show you, all you can call that is a quadrilateral. Do you know why? Because it has four sides. You cannot prove by looking at this unlabeled quadrilateral that it is a square, because you are not told that it has congruent sides. You are not told that the sides are parallel. You are not told that there are right angles. So remember, I've told you this in previous lessons. You have to look at what you're given to be able to classify it. However, if you were given all of these signs, you were shown that the sides were equilateral, and you were shown that they had right angles in all the corners, and then you called it a quadrilateral, you would be wrong. Not because it isn't a quadrilateral, but because when you're asked to classify, you have to give the most specific answer that you can. Okay? So, you also you would be wrong, but I wouldn't take off all the points if you called it a rectangle, because a rectangle doesn't have to have four. In fact, you wouldn't call it a rectangle when it has four congruent sides. So you would have to call it a square to get the most specific answer. Okay, I'll refer back to that as we're going through this. All right, on page 530, there are more than just quadrilaterals. We're talking about all kinds of polygons today. And poly means many. Gon is sides again, so you have many-sided figures, okay? So, let's look over at page 530 at polygons. you do need to be able to recognize all 6 of these. I'm going to go through them very quickly, but a triangle has 3 sides. Quadrilateral does not have to be a square. It just has to have 4 sides. We've just spent a lot of time on that. Penta, the prefix means 5. That's a pentagon. Hexagon, hexa means 6. Septa or hepta, you use hepta. I grew up knowing septa, so I get confused. But heptagon has 7 sides. I don't think I'm going to be able to draw that. That might be one. And then you should recognize octagon because of stop signs. And the prefix octa means 8. Okay, so those are your 6 other types of polygons. Now, one other thing I need to explain to you about, actually 2 more things about polygons. Look at example 2. It tells us that letter A, this kind of drawing, is not a polygon because it is not made up entirely of line segments. If you look up at the definition above key concept, it says a polygon is a geometric figure that's made up of 3 or more line segments. This is not a line segment, it's a curve. So keep that in mind. You might have the little hint that it's many straight sides. Okay, you cannot have curves in polygons. No curves. Okay, and the other thing that you need to know is it has to be closed, but we must have covered that before because I don't see it in this lesson. So there you have it. Okay. So knowing this about curves, look down at guided practice number 2, 3, and 4. If you want to pause it and try to answer the question, then come back. Number 2 is a polygon, and because it is, we have to classify it. And the only classification we can give it is hexagon because we know it has 6 sides. Number 3 is also a polygon because there are no curves. Okay, it is a little bit more confusing, but there are 8 sides, so I would classify it as an octagon. Number 4 is an oval. It has curves. It is not a polygon, so you would answer no. One other bit of information you have to have in 10.4 is the term regular polygon, and you will see this at the top of 531. Here is a triangle. Sorry for my not straight lines. And also this, I drew more of an isosceles triangle, but I'm going to copy out of the, I can't do that because regular, it really needs to look regular, and I'll explain that in a second. You'll see why I couldn't use that triangle. This one isn't much better, but you're just going to have to go with it. Okay, notice the markings on the nicely drawn triangle in your book. At the top of 531, they tell, they tell you that the sides are congruent, and they also tell you that the angles are congruent. Okay, we're going to come back to that in a second. The next drawing is of a square. I know it's a square because it has 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles. Now you might say, well, it doesn't show that they're parallel. You cannot have right angles if these opposite lines are not parallel. And then the 1-2 pentagon on the right is also considered a regular polygon, which we'll talk about in 1 second. And that's a terrible drawing, but you can see that all 5 sides are congruent, and also all 5 angles are the same measure or are congruent. Okay, now what does that mean? A regular polygon is defined as a polygon where all sides are equal in length and all angles are equal in measure. So if you go back to number 2 on page 530 at the bottom, you saw the hexagon there. It is a polygon because it has all straight lines, okay? But it is not regular because all 6 sides are not the same measure. So you will have to identify polygons as regular or not regular as we go through this, okay? There's a little bit about diagonals, and you can see that in example 3. I want to just point out to you, and I'm going to try to use this same pentagon up here, that when diagonals, you'll get to this a lot more in the 7th grade, but when diagonals are drawn in a polygon, they always start from the same point, and the purpose of them is to form triangles, okay? You can use diagonals to find the sum of the angle measures in any regular polygon, well, in any really polygon. And the way that we do that is by dividing the polygon into triangles. And we know that the sum of angle measures in a triangle is 180. So here we have 3 triangles adding up to 180 in each one. And when you multiplied that by 3, you would see that in any pentagon, the angle measures would add to 540. I think you're only going to get asked that in one question. I'll try to go over it if I can remember which one it is. It also has to do with guided practice number 5. So if what I just said makes sense, try guided practice number 5 and then come back and we will go over it together. All right. First part of this, number 5, you need to understand. Second part, I feel like is 7th grade. I'm going to go over it, but don't worry about knowing it like for a quiz or test, okay? Number 5, suppose a polygon is a regular octagon. Now, this is the worst octagon I've ever seen drawn on my board here, but you're just going to have to go with it. It says it's regular. What does that mean? It means all sides are equal, okay? So because I'm showing you these hash marks, you just have to take my word for it that they're all equal. And the number 5 tells you that they're all 5 feet, okay? So what is the perimeter? Well, an octagon has 8 sides. Each side is 5 feet. So you should know that the perimeter is 40 feet in length. All right. Now, sum of angle measures, if that was making sense, follow along, but please don't get overwhelmed by this. This is really 7th grade. I'm not going to ask you questions on this one, okay? You have to draw the diagonals from the same vertex up above, okay? Well, start from any point, but you have to stay there to divide it into triangles. And you would see that that divides an octagon into 6 triangles. Each one is 180 degrees. When you multiply it to 6, you get 1,080 degrees, okay? All right, don't worry about that part. I'm going to end this video here, and then I will go in a part 2 to go over some of the problems from the section.